14th century, Florence, Italy. The population suffers from the onset of the plague, plus chaos and unrest plunge the city even further into the abyss of lawlessness. Giobbino delle Rotto is the leader of a gang of robbers who enjoy impunity and rob everyone around. Giobbino does not hesitate to kill, but he likes to deceive people more. Giobbino enjoys his power and does not like to lose, so he is haunted by the young guy Lorenzo. He is an excellent swordsman and has neutralized several robbers, so he is now running away from reinforcements led by Giobbino. Pompinia Anastargi is the daughter of a wealthy merchant and a very beautiful girl, who is considered the most desirable bride in Florence. Her father recently died, so Pompinia is also facing difficult times. But the girl continues to avoid excessive male attention and maintains her innocence. Lorenzo knows Pompinia and is in love with the girl, so he sometimes brings flowers to her house. Later, Giobbino meets Pompinia in a church where she is praying for her father's repose. He worries about her future, and Pompinia says that she will soon marry the Russian Count Dzerjinski, who is already traveling to Florence. According to Giobbino, Pompinia's father, before his death, blessed his daughter's marriage, but not with Dzerjinski. Giobbino has paid off all the debts of the Anastargi family and assures Pompinia that she was promised to him. Pompinia does not intend to marry Giobbino, so while he kisses her hand, the girl thinks about how to leave the city unnoticed and where to hide. In the vicinity of Florence, Giobbino's men are pursuing Lorenzo when suddenly he meets a stranger who is carrying a dead and therefore a former gardener of a women monastery. According to the stranger, only deaf-mute men are accepted into the monastery, and Lorenzo understands that at the moment the vacancy of a gardener is probably vacant. Lorenzo hides in a tree, and the pursuers return back to Florence. Lorenzo fights better than climbs trees, so he soon falls down and loses consciousness. In this state, the novices of the monastery find him and take Lorenzo away to provide first aid. He pretends to be deaf and dumb, and the young nuns are happy about this, because now he can stay in the monastery without breaking the rules. The nuns consider Lorenzo an angel who came down from heaven to bring something new to the monastery service, and his beauty and silence promise to keep everything that happens secret. Lorenzo loves being a gardener, because on his first evening he takes a bath in the company of 2 nuns. In Florence, Pompinia calls all her friends to church and offers to escape the plague in a country villa that her father left her as an inheritance. The friends agree when suddenly Giobbino appears and threatens death, which will overtake anyone who leaves Florence. The church artist Tindero sees what is happening and introduces himself as a priest in order to kick out the armed robbers and Giobbino himself out of God's temple. The grateful friends of Pompinia take Tindero with them to marry the newlyweds in the villa. Pompinia leaves for a monastery where she plans to hide her identity under the clothes of a nun until Count Dzerjinski arrives. Keeping her maiden honor among the nuns for Pompinia will be safer, at least she thinks so until she meets the gardener Lorenzo. Pompinia learns from her sisters that the gardener is deaf and dumb, and this surprises her, but the girl does not reveal Lorenzo's secret. Pompinia liked him always, so now she begins to be jealous Lorenzo of sisters, because rumors about his male responsiveness quickly spread throughout the monastery. Lorenzo is kind and friendly, so he does not refuse intimacy to half of the local novices. He does not recognize Pompinia in her monastic attire, so he continues to enjoy the hospitality from the sisters without feeling threatened. Later, Count Dzerjinski comes to Florence, but instead of Pompinia he meets Giobbino. A dispute arises between the men over the wedding with Pompinia. Giobbino insists on his candidacy and invites Dzerjinski to leave Florence as soon as possible, threatening his health. Later in the city, the count receives a letter from Pompinia's servant with the address of the villa where she is waiting for him, and a satisfied Dzerjinski heads there. In the monastery, the sisters invite Pompinia to spend the evening with Lorenzo, but she refuses, although jealousy haunts her. On the way to the villa, Dzerjinski is ambushed by Giobbino and his robbers. The wounded count manages to escape and continues on his way to Pompinia's villa, but without his men. One day, Pompinia enters Lorenzo's hut and blindfolds him. She admits that Lorenzo comes to her every night in her dreams, and Pompinia is unable to resist her feelings. And although Lorenzo is indeed not deaf, he does not recognize Pompinia's voice. She passionately kisses Lorenzo, and when he takes off the bandage, the mysterious guest is no longer there. Pomponia's friends are ambushed by slave traders along the way, Elisa comes up with an idea on how to use cunning and seduction to free her friends from captivity and leave the bandit camp. She agrees to an audience with the leader and, left alone, lulls his vigilance with the help of dance. Elisa is virgin, so the leader is satisfied only with the dance, because this way the girl will not lose her value as a slave. Elisa is surprised by this term, because she did not know that in medieval Italy a dozen armed thugs would appoint as their leader a highly spiritual connoisseur of dance. Unlike him, the robbers demand more than just dancing from Elisa, so she announces a competition who of them has the largest one. She lines up the men, from small to great, and asks the question whether she will start on the right or on the left. While the robbers quarrel and fight for the right to be first, Elisa frees her friends and together they leave the slavers' camp. Later, a servant informs Pompinia of the Count's arrival in Florence, and this news saddens her. She understands that Lorenzo is unlikely to voluntarily leave the monastery, so she tells the abbess that their gardener hears perfectly and speaks well. Pompinia leaves for the villa, and the next morning Lorenzo is expelled from the monastery. In the forest near a waterfall, Elisa meets the wandering Count Dzierżynski, and he admires her beauty. The Count is sure that this is his bride, because he has never met a more charming girl in his life, and Elisa plays along with him, calling herself Pompinia. Dzierżynski considers himself the luckiest man in the world, because he still found his bride safe and sound, and the Count also considers the fact that Elisa comes out of the water naked and desires intimacy to be a good sign, but a quiet and family sign that does not need publicity. Soon, Pompinia decides to return to the monastery to make sure that Lorenzo is kicked out of there, and to be sure that local nuns will no longer get what she herself dreams of. Lorenzo meets Pompinia at the gates of the monastery and offers to escort her to the villa as a guard. Together they arrive at the estate and Pompinia invites Lorenzo to spend some time here until Dzierżynski arrives. In the evening they have dinner and Lorenzo admits that he has fallen in love with a girl, but does not know who she is. That blindfolded kiss was so unforgettable and sensual that Lorenzo now wants to find his beloved at any cost. Because thoughts about her haunt him, Pompinia is sure that Lorenzo will soon forget about the one, but he is persistent and confident in his love for the stranger. Pompinia offers to kiss Lorenzo so that he will forget the stranger. She asks Lorenzo to close his eyes, when suddenly Giobbino appears in front of the villa, full of hatred for the guy and also wanting to marry Pompinia. Lorenzo accepts the fight, and this time Giobbino wins, because he came to the duel on a horse. Pompinia understands that the former gardener will very soon become fertilizer, so she stops the fight with the condition that she will marry Giobbino if he leaves Lorenzo alive. Giobbino agrees, because being alive does not mean being free, and puts Lorenzo in prison. Pompinia finds out about this and demands that Giobbino release the prisoner before the wedding. A church artist Tindero comes to watch the ceremony, whom the robbers mistake for a priest and ask him to officiate the wedding. Pompinia asks Tindero to hold the wedding for as long as possible, and he agrees, because in these harsh times, helping your neighbor and a bag of gold are never superfluous. Lorenzo leaves the villa accompanied by two strong robbers, and this time luck is again on his side. Lorenzo neutralizes the guards and returns to the villa. Dzierżynski overtakes him because he has a horse, and arrives at the estate when the wedding is completed. The Count enters into battle with Giobbino, and his robbers are neutralized by Lorenzo, who arrived a minute later because he is almost as fast as a horse. Dzierżynski defeats Giobbino in a duel when suddenly Lorenzo appears. He demands to finish what he started, because now Giobbino is without a horse, which means he needs to fight again. He invites Giobbino to a duel around a deep well, which prevents him from concentrating. Lorenzo wins the fight and Giobbino falls into the well. Tindero hears the last sounds of Giobbino and tells Pompinia that she was not married as expected. Tindero is a church artist, so he is as much a priest as Pompinia a widow. She is happy about this news, but Lorenzo will still remain unattainable for her because next to him stands survived Dzierżynski. who came here to get married. Pomponier is forced to accept the inevitable and goes down to the Count to hear from him a marriage proposal, when suddenly Dzerjinski refuses. Elisa comes to the villa. The Count met her in the forest so unforgettably that now she is his Pomponier. Dzerjinski confesses his love to Elisa, and Pomponier understands that if she is in the mood for a wedding, then it should take place today. Pomponier catches up with Lorenzo, who wants to return to the monastery for his beautiful stranger. He is unable to forget that kiss and is obliged to find his beloved. Pomponier asks Lorenzo to close his eyes and repeats her confession that he comes to her in her dreams and she is in love with Lorenzo. She kisses him and Lorenzo understands that there is no need to return to the monastery because his beloved is Pomponier de Anastargi.